Okay, let's just get this out of the way. Forget everything you think you know about honey. This isn't just something you put in your tea. It's a bizarre, almost magical substance that literally never spoils, a battlefield medicine that saved actual kings, and, believe it or not, a legal nightmare that had ancient Romans running through their neighborhoods banging pots and pans. We've got a lot to unpack here. So get this. Out in the country of Georgia, archaeologists were digging, and they found these jars of honey that are 5,500 years old. To put that in perspective, that is older than most of the pyramids at Giza. And the truly insane part? It was still perfectly edible. This isn't just old food, it's a substance that seems to completely ignore the rules of time. So, right, that's the big question, isn't it? How is that even possible? What gives honey this almost supernatural ability to just not spoil? Well, the answer is a perfect storm of chemistry, biology, and a secret little weapon that comes straight from the bee's own immune system. And while we're at it, we're going to get into why ancient civilizations were so obsessed with it. They used it for everything, from ghost-proofing their breakfasts to, well, to this. Yes, you are reading that correctly. Apparently, Pharaoh Pepi II hated flies so much that he had his servants coated in honey to act as human flypaper. The history of honey gets weird, and it gets weird fast. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with honey's immortality, then see why it was basically ancient gold. We'll look at its use by warriors and poets, put it under the microscope, and finally, check out its amazing future in a jar. All right, first up, the ancient world's gold. We're talking tears of gods and some of the strangest ancient laws you have ever heard. You know, you can tell a lot about a culture by its stories. Take two ancient superpowers and their ideas about where bees came from. On one hand, you have the Egyptians. For them, it was pure divinity. The sun god Ra wept, and his tears hit the desert sand and transformed into bees. Then, you have the Romans. They believed in something called bugonia, the idea that if you left a dead ox to rot, a swarm of bees would just spontaneously burst out of the carcass. So one is divine light, and the other is, well, it's kind of Gothic agriculture, isn't it? And because the Egyptians thought honey was divine, they put it in everything. Their medical texts, like the famous Ebers Papyrus, are just full of these wild remedies. I mean, an anti-wrinkle mask of honey and salt, okay, I can see that. But treating an eye infection with honey and pigeon droppings? Or eating garlic and honey for breakfast to literally make your breath too powerful for ghosts to handle? That is some next-level thinking right there. The Romans, though, they had a much more practical problem. See, they believed bees were wild animals, or ferae bestiae, so you couldn't really own them like you could a cow. This led to a crazy legal loophole. If your swarm of bees flew up and over your neighbor's hedge, the second they were out of your sight, they legally became res nullius, property of no one. Poof, they were no longer yours. This law created this absolutely bizarre public ritual. To keep ownership of your bees while they were in the air, you had to physically chase them while making a ton of noise. This wasn't just to guide the bees. It was a public legal declaration to your entire neighborhood that, hey, I can still see them. These are still mine. Back off. It basically turned beekeeping into a really loud, high-stakes game of tag. Okay, let's jump forward in time for our next section, warriors, poets, and potions. We're diving into some blood, guts, and yep, we're back to bird poop again. So, according to Norse mythology, the gods created this being named Kvasir, who was so wise, he knew the answer to literally any question. Naturally, a couple of dwarves murdered him, drained his blood, and mixed it with honey. This created the mead of poetry. Anyone who drank it would become a brilliant poet or scholar. So for the Vikings, genius and creativity was quite literally a cocktail of divine blood and honey. But here's the best part of the myth. The god Odin eventually stole all the mead. As he was flying away from a giant in the form of an eagle, he accidentally let some of it slip out his back end. That batch became known as the Rhymister's share, the portion reserved for talentless hacks and terrible poets. So yeah, if you've ever had to sit through some truly awful poetry, the Vikings had a mythological explanation for it. Now, on the battlefield, their use of honey was just as intense. They came up with this really grim but brutally effective diagnostic test. If a warrior took a deep wound to the stomach, they'd be fed this potent broth of onions and honey. The healer would then lean in close and smell the wound. If they could smell onions coming from the wound, it meant the digestive tract was perforated. There was no hope. It was a death sentence. And you know, maybe no one valued bees more than the ancient Irish. Their laws, the Bech-Bretha, were incredibly detailed. If your neighbor's bee stung you, you were entitled to a meal of their honey. But here's the kicker: only if you didn't kill the bee. If you swatted it, you got nothing. The bee's life was considered payment for your pain. It's just amazing. So all this history, the medicine, the magic, these incredible laws, it all boils down to one question: how? How is any of this possible? Well, to answer that, we have to swap the ancient scrolls for a microscope and take a look at honey's secret weapon. Honey is basically a microbial death trap. It has a triple threat. First, it's hygroscopic, which is a sciencey way of saying it has almost no water in it. So when a bacteria cell lands on honey, osmosis goes into overdrive, and the honey violently rips the water straight out of the cell wall. The bacteria just collapses and dies. It's death by dehydration. Second, it's super acidic, about the same pH as your morning orange juice, and most microbes just can't handle that. And third, bees add a special enzyme that's constantly producing tiny amounts of hydrogen peroxide, the stuff you use to clean a cut. It has its own built-in antiseptic. Now that chemical trifecta is enough to make honey last for thousands of years, but it's not what makes it a medical superstar. For that, we have to look at something the bee deliberately adds to the mix. It's not just a byproduct, it's a purpose-built biological weapon. It's called bee defensin 1. This is an incredibly powerful protein that comes from the honeybee's own immune system. They add it to honey on purpose to protect the hive from disease, and it just happens to protect us too. It works by essentially punching holes in the cell membranes of bacteria, just popping them like tiny balloons. This isn't passive preservation, this is active, targeted warfare. So does the type of honey you use matter? Oh, absolutely. Think of them as specialists. Manuka honey from New Zealand, for example, has a compound that physically collapses the cell walls of superbugs like MRSA. Sitter honey can actually stop E. coli from replicating its DNA. Jarrah honey basically goes in and shuts down the power plants inside fungal cells. But notice that last row? The clear, runny honey you probably have in your pantry? It's been pasteurized. That heat destroys all those delicate enzymes and, crucially, it completely wrecks the bee defensin 1 protein. It's been rendered medically useless. And this is what brings us to today, and the future in a jar. This ancient wisdom is finally meeting modern medicine, and it turns out honey is solving some of our biggest 21st century problems. In hospitals today, medical-grade honey is being used to tear through the slimy, protective biofilms that antibiotic-resistant bacteria build for themselves. For cancer patients, studies show it can reduce the incredibly painful mouth sores caused by chemotherapy by over 60%. And in regenerative medicine, this is wild, it's being used as a natural antiseptic scaffold to guide the growth of new cells. We're not just healing wounds, we are literally using honey to build new skin. So after everything these tiny creatures have done for us, it seems only fair to pay them back. And it's actually really easy. Let dandelions and clover grow in the spring. That's the first thing they eat after a long winter. Put out a shallow dish of water with some pebbles or marbles in it so they have a safe place to drink. And if you find a tired, struggling bee, please don't give it honey. It can spread diseases between hives. A tiny spoonful of simple sugar water is the perfect, safe energy drink to get it back in the air. Which leaves us with one last big thought. We are entering an age where our best antibiotics are starting to fail. The rise of the superbug is one of the single biggest threats we face. And it just makes you wonder, could it be that the answer isn't some brand new drug from a high-tech lab, but a complex 50-million-year-old biological weapon perfected by a tiny insect and just waiting for us in a jar?